When King Kong opened in 1933, it took the world by storm. The title character immediately became a household name, and his tragic story would quickly come to be known and loved by moviegoers all over the world. Yet despite the tremendous success of Kong's debut feature, it would take a number of years for similar films to become commonplace, and the character's return to screens was hardly a certainty. In the ensuing decades, several ambitious revivals were proposed and subsequently scrapped, leaving the Great Apes' prospects in considerable doubt. That changed when a shady producer brokered a shady deal that ultimately brought the beast to my second home, Japan, where the mighty Kong would meet his mightiest foe. I'm Tyler Martin, and this is Monsters from the Id. King Kong served as a profound inspiration for innumerable viewers, among them many who would go on to become notable figures in the motion picture business. A case in point, upon its release in Japan, an up-and-coming cinematographer named Eiichi Tsuburaya was spellbound, setting him on the path that would soon make him the father of Japanese special effects. Tsuburaya was so struck by the film that he purchased a print and examined it in minute detail, tenaciously developing his own signature methods of bringing the impossible to life. A series of events which would, years later, prove instrumental for Kong himself. Back in the States, a potential remake of the original classic had fallen through in 1952, and effects wizard Willis O'Brien was left itching to bring the mighty ape back to the screen in a big way. In the early 1960s, he came up with an intriguing pitch. King Kong vs. Frankenstein, later known as King Kong vs. Prometheus, would bring two iconic monstrosities together in grand fashion. In this treatment, a descendant of Victor Frankenstein, working in Africa, creates a giant servant from the constituent parts of various animals. He chances to meet Carl Denham Jr., who, having learned absolutely nothing from his father's error, convinces the scientist to put the creature on display in a show alongside the one and only Kong, who somehow managed to survive his tragic fall from the Empire State Building. Of course, things go horribly wrong, and the monsters end up duking it out in San Francisco, ultimately tumbling from the Golden Gate Bridge and vanishing beneath the waves. RKO president Daniel O'Shea was enthusiastic about the idea, but as the studio was no longer in a position to produce such a large-scale film, he introduced O'Brien to producer John Beck, who promised to do his utmost to find a suitable studio and get the picture made, with O'Brien's participation. Beck made the rounds with the pitch, but the American film companies he approached, balking at the extravagant costs that stop-motion animation would entail, refused to take the project on. Beck's luck turned when he met with Japan's biggest movie studio, Toho, who were very interested in the pitch. They jumped at the proposal on two conditions: that Frankenstein and all related story elements be replaced with Toho's own homegrown monster, Godzilla, and that the creatures be realized via their trademark men-in-suit effects instead of stop-motion. Displaying fewer scruples than Denham or Frankenstein, Beck readily accepted Toho's terms and soon arranged a lucrative distribution deal with Universal for the film's North American release, all without O'Brien's knowledge or consent. When he eventually found out about Beck's treachery, O'Brien was deeply hurt, but lacked the finances to pursue legal action. The devastated effects visionary died of a heart attack in 1962, his final dream unfulfilled. Miriam C. Cooper was likewise outraged upon learning about the project, attempting to block its American release. This effort, of course, failed, and movie history was made. Toho went full speed ahead with King Kong vs. Godzilla, once again assembling the team responsible for their famous cycle of kaiju spectaculars. Eiji Tsuburaya, now head of the studio's special effects department, was ecstatic to finally have the opportunity of making his own King Kong movie. Director Ishiro Honda, concerned about the absurd premise but determined to make the most of it, opted for a satirical angle. Like many of his contemporaries, Honda was put off by the rampant consumerism that was then, as now, dominating Japanese life. A major symptom of this was the country's television industry, which had exploded in recent years, with networks vying for ratings constantly one-upping each other with ever more outrageous stunts. And what stunt could be more outrageous than endangering an entire nation for the sake of publicity? Taking a page from Toho's wildly successful comedy pictures, Honda and screenwriter Shinichi Sekizawa present the story of manic ad executive Mr. Tako, played to explosive perfection by beloved comic actor Ichiro Arishima, who, desperate to boost ratings for the program his firm sponsors, dispatches his accomplices Sakurai and Furue, comedy stalwarts Tadao Takashima and Yu Fujiki, to remote Faro Island to capture a rumored giant god, as it turns out a mammoth simian called King Kong, to use as a marketing ploy. Meanwhile, Godzilla has broken free from his icy tomb in the Arctic Ocean and is tearing a swath of destruction across his home territory in Japan. Ultimately, the two are set on a collision course that culminates in an epic brawl wherein they raise Atami Castle, a then newly constructed tourist trap, in a final stab at the country's shameless embrace of commercialism before plummeting into the sea below. After a tense moment, Kong emerges victorious, with no sign of Godzilla, for the time being. Dampening Eiji Tsuburaya's long-cherished dream was a budget restricted by RKO's steep fee for use of the King Kong character, resulting in effects work that is not always up to his usual standards. Indeed, the Kong suit itself is a shabby affair, though actor Shoichi Hirose does an admirable job compensating with a spirited performance opposite the great Haruo Nakajima, reprising his role as Godzilla. Despite the drawbacks, Tsuburaya and his team impress with a number of standout sequences, such as Godzilla's train attack, and scenes depicting the Self-Defense Force's meticulous counter-monster operations. At Toho's urging, the monsters were made a part of the film's comedic angle, engaging in Son of Kong-like shenanigans and tussling like professional wrestlers, an approach gladly embraced by Tsuburaya but opposed by Honda. Indeed, composer Akira Ifukube, no doubt thrilled by the chance to marry his barbaric compositional style with the elemental image of two massive beasts in combat, brings musical gravity to even the most ridiculous hijinks, as though in solidarity with Honda. For the native scenes, Ifukube, a seasoned musicologist, devised the most authentically tribal-sounding music ever created for a King Kong film, incorporating lyrics sung in Mono Alu, an obscure tongue spoken in the Solomons, namely one Fauro Island, located in close proximity to the movie's fictitious Faro Island. Unleashed onto an eager populace in August 1962, King Kong vs. Godzilla was a massive moneymaker, becoming one of Japan's biggest domestic hits of the year, also triumphing in the United States and other territories in a heavily altered version prominently bearing the name of our old friend John Beck. Casualties of this cut include Honda's finest character moments, supplanted by newly shot scenes of newscasters commenting on the action from cheap-looking sets, and Akira Ifukube's marvelous score, most of which is jettisoned in favor of library music from an assortment of genre films. While still highly entertaining in its own right, this interpretation pales in comparison to the organic warmth of the original. It bears mentioning that King Kong vs. Godzilla has been a focus of much misunderstanding and misinformation over the years. Fortunately, the long-standing myth that two endings were shot, with Godzilla winning the title match in the Japanese version, has long since been put to bed. Another problem has been the persistence of highly erroneous English subtitles for the Japanese cut, which were made for bootleg video releases in the 1990s and continue to linger online. These comprise an appalling mixture of guesswork and outright nonsense, hopelessly obscuring the sharpness of Sekizawa's script. Fortunately, much better options are available now. Check the video description for details. Notwithstanding its disreputable origins and the subsequent controversies, King Kong vs. Godzilla, while flawed, remains among the most interesting films in the storied careers of both monsters, and one which catapulted our beloved ape back into the spotlight after nearly 3 decades of absence. A few years after his return to the big screen, our hero transitioned to TV with The King Kong Show, produced by Rankin Bass Animated Entertainment, then known as Videocraft, famed for its holiday specials like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. Like with most of the studio's output, the legwork for this series was outsourced to Japan, in this case Toei Animation. The King Kong show follows the exploits of a friendly Kong and his human companions, the Bond family, as they deal with an array of crises and disasters, many of which are masterminded by the mad scientist Doctor Who. Seeing enough success with this series to warrant a crack at a live-action film, Rankin Bass soon struck a deal with Toho, who were eager to squeeze out one more Kong movie before their rights to the character expired. The first attempt was Operation Robinson Crusoe, King Kong vs. Ebirah, a South Seas adventure which would see a group of castaways awakening Kong to combat a terrorist organization bent on world domination. However, for reasons that differ depending on the source, Rankin Bass was displeased with this proposal, which was salvaged by replacing Kong with Godzilla at the last minute, resulting in Jun Fukuda's wonderful Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster. Luckily, the second try stuck. King Kong Escapes, loosely based on the King Kong show, can best be described as the product of throwing Godzilla, James Bond, and Johnny Quest into a blender, with better results than one might expect. Despite condescending attitudes from the American side, namely producer Arthur Rankin Jr. and actor Rhodes Reason, who disdained what they saw as inscrutable and inferior Japanese filmmaking, Ishiro Honda, Eiji Tsuburaya, and their veteran crews managed to craft a rather unique and enjoyable outing for our hairy champion. In the picture, Reason's UN submarine commander Carl Nelson, accompanied by Japanese screen idol and sci-fi regular Akira Takarada as Lieutenant Commander Jiro Nomura, and first-timer Linda Miller as Lieutenant Susan Watson, encounter the legendary Kong on his home turf, Mondo Island. Upon seeing Watson, the ape is immediately love-struck, but in a refreshing change of pace, lets her and her comrades go when it becomes clear that his affections are not reciprocated. Meanwhile, the nefarious Doctor Who, veteran character player Hideo Amamoto in a show-stealing part, has created a robotic version of King Kong for the purpose of excavating Element X, a rare radioactive substance coveted by the world's governments. He is financed by an unnamed country represented by femme fatale Madame Piranha, Miehama, fresh off her part in You Only Live Twice. When Mechanicong proves unequal to the task, Who sets out to snatch the real Kong to finish the job, also kidnapping our three heroes to use as bargaining chips. Of course, the plan fails, Kong escapes, and a showdown ensues with the ape and his mechanical counterpart duking it out atop Tokyo Tower. Despite his growing discontent with being pigeonholed by the studio into an increasingly confining genre, Honda directs with a sure hand, eliciting solid performances from his cast and leaning into the outlandish excitement of a Saturday morning cartoon. Akira Ifukube provides another excellent score, including an adventurous main title cue and a moving love theme which perfectly accentuates Kong's unrequited feelings for Susan. Eiji Tsuburaya, once again elated to work with Kong, stages some exciting visuals. These are hampered to a noticeable degree by another goofy-looking Kong costume, reportedly designed according to Rankin Bass's strict specifications. But veteran suit actor Haruo Nakajima makes the most of things, conveying fierce animal energy and emotion in one of his most inspired turns. Sadly, King Kong Escapes managed to draw only a small fraction of King Kong vs. Godzilla's stellar box office numbers, and the silver screen's seminal giant returned to his island lair for another long rest. But eventually, show business would come crawling back, eager to drag the beast back to civilization once more. Next up, don't miss this series' third episode, where we'll look at Kong's triumphant return to the land of his birth. Once again, thank you for joining me. I'll see you next time.